The movie begins with Marvel Studios animation playing. In the background, it can be heard those immortal words of Tony Stark saying,
And I am Iron Man.
Cut to present when Steve Rogers is in Wakanda chatting with his best friend Bucky Barnes. They talk about how in the past decade they have seen so much. Aliens, robots, sorcerers traveling out to space and through time. The conversation steers to Steve asking whether Bucky misses the past, the simpler times during World War II. Whether, if he gets an opportunity to go back, will he take it? Bucky says no. He is haunted by his nightmares, the bad deeds he did as the Winter Soldier. He can't simply undo that by going to the past. He has to live with it. Then Steve talks about his thoughts on it. Seeing Peggy Carter in the 70s made him want to stay, be with her, live a peaceful life. Bucky tells Steve that he should do that. It is that moment when Steve decides that he will be the person returning the Infinity Stones. Before parting ways, Steve gives Bucky his small diary. This conversation is then interrupted by Bruce Banner. He updates Steve about the new time machine. The most brilliant minds of the time are working on it, in which it includes Bruce Banner himself, with time machine notes of Tony Stark, Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne, Rocket Raccoon, and Shuri with her resources of Wakanda. When Steve asks what's taking them so long since they have built a time machine already, that's when Bruce tells him, it's not that easy. It's not about just going back in past to get the Infinity Stones. Now, things are more complicated because they have to navigate through a complex multiverse. To return the stones, they have to go back to the same reality from where they took it. A few days go by for the time machine to be ready. When Avengers gather for Tony's funeral, the heroes discuss who gets to return the Infinity Stones. Most of the heroes have families to tend to and other important matters, responsibilities. They can't simply leave it and go back to past, even if it is for an instant. The number is down to 3 candidates between Bruce, Steve, and Thor. Bruce argues that he has the responsibility given by the Ancient One to return the Infinity Stones. He should be the one to do it. But then Steve argues that Bruce is not fit for this job, considering his degraded arm due to the snap. Steve insists that it has to be him. Thor agrees, saying, "If Odin finds you worthy, then who am I to argue?" He says, hinting at the fact that Steve can lift the Mjolnir. Steve is ready to travel to the past with the briefcase of Infinity Stones and the hammer. A while back, Bruce introduced this theory that if Steve goes to Vormir at the right time, he can give Nat the stones so she will not have to sacrifice her life for it. Steve says he can't do that since it will change the timeline, which might lead to bad consequences. That's why Bruce tries to induce guilt in Steve, telling him,
I tried. When I had the gauntlet, the stones, I really tried to bring her back.
but didn't work. Hence begins Steve's quest for the reverse time heist. First, he goes to New York in 2012. After Tony and Steve of that time go to 70s, the older Steve interrupts Scott Lang before he time jumps back to the present. He tells him to take the Mind Stone and give him the scepter. They have a funny back and forth as Steve tries to explain where he has come from and what happened, but eventually he gives up. He simply orders Scott to take the stone. And being a Captain America fanboy, Scott does that without a question. Next, Steve goes to the Ancient One, to the New York Sanctum. The Ancient One is waiting for him. "What took you so long?" she asks. She takes the time stone, but immediately gets a vision of a dark future. All her fears turned into reality. Her reality. The absence of Infinity Stones has led to fracturing their reality, creating the darkest timeline. In the far future, specifically in the year 2023 of this alternate reality, she says that the otherworldly being Dormammu is being summoned. Since there is no time stone, the sorcerer of that time can't reverse his arrival. Steve is not worried since he can time travel back in past to avoid this happening by returning the Infinity Stones. But that's when she explains that this is not how time works when you include otherworldly being like Dormammu in the equation. The flow of time got fractured when you took the stones. In this reality, all of the past, present, and future is happening simultaneously, since the stones disappeared. As we speak, a team of heroes in the year 2023 is fighting to keep evil being Dormammu from entering our reality. So even if it is happening in future, it's happening simultaneously. This is why, even if you have a time machine wrapped around your wrist, you're still on the clock. It is only a matter of few hours before our heroes lose and Dormammu takes over. After that, the damage is irreversible. The Ancient One not just tells him, she shows him this dark future where the heroes of alternate reality are fighting the beings who are summoning Dormammu. This builds a time pressure to Steve's quest for returning Infinity Stones. He can't just take all the time he wants, as Bruce said. Meanwhile, we get a peek at this alternate reality. From this time, we'll keep on jumping to this parallel reality, where things are happening simultaneously while Steve returns the stones. This new team calls itself the Dark Avengers, considering the fact that they are living in the darkest timeline and how it has changed them. The roster includes the leader, Sam Wilson aka the Captain America, unworthy Thor with a metal arm and an axe instead of his enchanted hammer Mjolnir, mad, savage grey Hulk, the grim version of Doctor Strange, a different team of the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is basically the result of what would the Avengers team be if the Infinity Stones didn't influence their story after the point they were taken. For example, no Scarlet Witch. Since there is no Tesseract post-70s, there is no Iron Man, no Captain Marvel, no Steve Rogers waking up from the ice. Thor fights a Dark Elf, but since he fails to summon Mjolnir, the Dark Elf cuts off his hand. Getting back to Steve's quest, Steve then goes to 2013 Asgard to return the Reality Stone. Once he takes that stone out of the briefcase, it instantly turns into fluid and gets sucked inside Jane Foster. Now that the third stone is back in place, Steve is ready to leave. But not so fast. That very instant, Thor catches him. Thor thinks that Steve is an imposter. How else would one explain him being there? Thus begins a fight between them. While Steve is trying to dodge all his punches, he's also trying to explain the situation without revealing too much about the future. Then, at one point during the fight, Thor calls for Mjolnir, but instead of going to Thor, it goes in the hands of Steve Rogers. This shocks Thor and is frozen in his place. That very moment, Steve gets an opportunity to escape. Next, Steve goes to 2014 Morag to return the Power Stone. Unfortunately, he learns that he lost all his extra Pym particle during the fight with Thor, which he needs to go to Vormir and 70s to return the remaining 2 Infinity Stones. But there is a way out. Rhodey, aka War Machine, has already left, but Nebula is left behind. Steve goes to talk to Nebula, trying to find a way out of this situation. Nebula tells him that if she gives her Pym particle to him and Steve travels to Vormir instead of teleporting there, maybe this is still possible. So they do that, but now Steve needs a ride to Vormir. Need a ride? Asks Peter Quill from the dark future. As it turns out, the future version of Doctor Strange knows that Steve Rogers, aka Captain America of the main reality, is working to return the Infinity Stones to fix the timeline. He watches over him because they have to hold back Dormammu only until Steve returns all the stones. Seeing Steve stuck on Morag, Strange sends a part of his team to help him. That team includes the Guardians of the Galaxy, their spaceship, and Sam Wilson, aka the Captain America of this dark reality. They leave Morag except Nebula, because she knows she can't leave. Thanos has found her, and if she goes with them, Thanos will follow. So Nebula gets caught, and she is tortured to retrieve information from her. Thanos learns that he can go to the future of the main reality and use the Infinity Stones that the Avengers are gathering right now. Same as Endgame, but with a minor difference. Now that Nebula has no Pym particles, Thanos needs to find another way out of this. Lucky for him, he is able to extract information from Nebula that he can find more Pym particles from Vormir, since Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, and Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, have one each. On the way to Vormir, Steve Rogers bonds with Dark version Sam Wilson. Sam tells how, in this alternate reality, things are different, things are darker. They compare notes. Sam tells how he idolizes Steve Rogers, the first Captain America, based on what he read about him in the museum. They never got the opportunity to meet face to face. Meanwhile, Steve tells him how they are good friends in the main reality. I'd like that, Sam says. Reaching Vormir, Steve goes ahead. Meanwhile, Black Widow and Hawkeye are yet to decide who will jump and sacrifice themselves for the stone. That's when Steve interrupts. He calls Red Skull's bluff about a soul for a soul. He knows that Red Skull is lying. That's because in the dark timeline, the quest of bringing Dormammu is led by Red Skull, who was freed because Natasha's soul took place of Red Skull. That's the true transaction happening at Vormir, a soul for a soul, not for the Soul Stone. This leads to an argument followed by a fight between Steve Rogers and Red Skull. Their fight is intervened by Thanos' children and his army to get the Pym particle. Meanwhile, more heroes from this alternate reality join Steve in this battle as they fight it out. This is the final third act battle. It's a huge battle with a lot of casualties on Vormir. Many people die from both sides. The battle ends with Thanos' children returning to the ship without the Pym particle. Meanwhile, Sam, while dying, gives his shield to Steve, saying that he should give the shield to Sam of his reality. Steve then takes the Soul Stone in his pocket to give to Clint. That's because he knows that Natasha Romanoff, although is alive, she can't go back to the main reality. This will change things. Hence, Natasha Romanoff joins Steve to travel to the 70s. There, They give Tony the space stone and return the Tesseract back to the basement. On their way out, Nat steals more PIM particles. Meanwhile, this Steve decides to have one last conversation with Peggy Carter. He wants to talk to her, get closure before returning to the main reality. He surprises her in the office and expects her to be shocked. She is shocked, but in a different way. Steve, how are you so young? She asks. You're not my Steve. My Steve is back at home cooking for me. I'm not your Peggy. Your Peggy is waiting for you in the past, where you left her. Normally, Steve won't break the laws of time to get back to Peggy Carter. But when he learns that he is always meant to unite with the love of his life, and he is the mysterious father of Peggy Carter's children, Steve takes a bold step and returns to Peggy Carter of the main reality to spend a peaceful life with her. Meanwhile, Natasha Romanoff travels to an unknown time and space using her PIM particle. Last we see, Steve Rogers is standing outside Peggy's house, gathering courage to ring the doorbell. Thus ends the movie Captain America, the Man Out of Time. There is a post-credit scene though, to tie up a loose end. A few weeks later, Thanos' son comes to him to tell him that they succeeded in creating the PIM particle all by themselves. This is when Thanos smiles, saying, "Finally, I am ready to fulfill my destiny," thus closing the loop of events that we saw in Endgame. This is my pitch. What do you think? Will you want to watch a movie like this of Captain America returning the Infinity Stones? Tell us in the comments down below, and if you like it, please like and share and subscribe to the channel World Building Fanatic.
And always remember, world building is so fantastic that I'm a fanatic.